Hello, Year 11. Welcome back. Hope you had a lovely long weekend. Into our next lesson of our Religious Studies, Philosophy and Ethics bridging course, getting you ready for your A-level. And today, really fascinating subject, I think, for lots of people. One particular topic that gets them into philosophy in the first place and into theology and religious studies in the first place. We're going to be looking at the problem of evil and suffering. Really knotty, really difficult, something that for thousands of years, some of the greatest thinkers that have ever lived have thought really hard about. So let's get straight into it. So our lesson is the problem of evil and suffering. And before we think about the problem of evil and suffering, we need to do a little bit of theology and think about what's sometimes called the concept of God. So we often use this word God. Here he is, there's God. How he's usually depicted, this sort of bearded man in the sky, almost always white, almost always old bearded man. But for us, for the purposes today, we're going to have to think a little bit hard about this, be a bit more technical, a little bit more sophisticated. What do we mean when we say God? What sort of a thing is God? And what's often called the God of classical theism, so the God of the Abrahamic religions, of the monotheistic religions, usually has three characteristics attributed to him, and he's described as him within the holy texts. First of all, he is omnipotent, which means that he's all-powerful. Second of all, he's omniscient, which means that he's all-knowing. And lastly, he's omnibenevolent, which means that he's all-loving. So that's usually the three sorts of characteristics that are ascribed to God. He's all-powerful, he's all-knowing, and he's all-loving. There are often other things that are attributed to him, for example, being the creator, the sustainer, the prime mover, being transcendent, being immanent, which means involved in earth. But these three characteristics sum up God. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. So here's the problem. We have an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God. But what's also true is that great evil occurs on earth. This picture taken from 9/11/2001, when two planes were flown into the Twin Towers, killing thousands of people at work. Babies, small children get debilitating diseases which cause them immense pain and suffering, and often end their lives before they've hardly started. During World War II and the Holocaust, or the Shoah, at least 6 million Jews were murdered, as well as Gypsy Romani travelers, people of color, disabled people. In Vietnam, thousands of children killed, lost their parents, struck by napalm, a kind of chemical that literally burns the clothes and the skin off them. And that's not even getting to the animal kingdom. Animals, of course, are capable of suffering, capable of pain, and tremendous, tremendous suffering and pain across the animal kingdom. So we have a problem. We have a problem. We have this all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God, and we have all of this evil and suffering. So for people of faith, for people that want to maintain this God, the belief that they have a God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, they have to square that with the existence of evil and suffering. And this goes right back to the ancient Greeks. So an ancient Greek philosopher, Epicurus, put it this way. He said, is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. If he can't stop it, then he's not all-powerful. Is he able, but not willing? Then he's malevolent. He's not all-loving. If he's able to stop suffering, but doesn't want to, then he's not all-loving. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Why is there evil? If he's able and willing to stop suffering, then why is there evil in the first place? And if he's neither able nor willing, then why would we call him God? If he's not all powerful, if he's not all knowing, if he's not all loving, why are we calling that thing God? Is it really worth worshipping? Is it worth worshipping something that's not all powerful? Is it worth worshipping something that isn't all loving and perhaps is even malevolent or evil? And so this problem of evil and suffering, thousands of years, has really troubled lots of minds and lots of people of faith. And lots of people of faith still grapple with this. They still struggle with this. There is still a bit of an itch at the back of their head of, gosh, I can't quite get my head around why there's so much evil and suffering, why such horrible things happen in the world if there's this loving God that's all powerful and could stop things. And this is sometimes called the logical problem of evil. It's actually a logical contradiction. So it's not just a problem, it's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to say that there's a being that's all powerful, that there's a being that's all loving, and evil exists. Those things are inconsistent. Those statements are inconsistent with each other. You can't believe all of them. That leaves you with a few options. You could just deny evil exists. You could say there's no such thing as evil. Some people have done that or redefined evil to say evil doesn't exist. It's just an absence of good, perhaps. It seems quite difficult to do that given the nature of the reality of the world. Like we can quite clearly and demonstrably see not just that there's some evil and suffering, there is a huge amount of evil and suffering, millions and millions of dying each year, hundreds of thousands of dying, millions dying of disease, preventable diseases, even things like diarrhea every year. A huge amount of evil and suffering in the world. So it seems like we can't deny that. So do we need to give up one of these characteristics of God? Well, not necessarily. First of all, we need to say that there's two different types of evil. There's moral evil and natural evil. So moral evil is something that people do, actions that people take. So immoral actions that people take. Whereas natural evil, awful things that happen as part of the natural world. So just pause for a moment and try and jot down or think of some examples of moral evil, and then try and think of some examples of natural evil. Pause the video and see if you can jot down some examples. Okay, great. So within moral evil, you might have got rape, murder, theft, all of these things done by people that cause suffering. In natural evil, earthquakes, famine, cancer, not caused by people, but still cause tremendous suffering. And God could have created the world so that there were no earthquakes. He could have created the world so that there's no cancer, but he didn't. And potentially he could stop people being able to rape and murder and thieve, but he doesn't. And as a result of that, there's tremendous evil and suffering, which may call into question either how powerful God is or how loving he is. So we're going to watch a quick video which sums up the problem of evil here.
We live in a world festering with moral evil, a world of wars, torture, rape, murder, and other acts of meaningless violence. In every city in the world every day, there are people deliberately inflicting pain on humans and other animals, and even enjoying others' suffering. There's also natural evil, such as disease, famine, floods, and earthquakes. This is terrible but undeniable. For anyone who believes in the existence of a benevolent God, who is also all-knowing and all-powerful, this presents a powerful challenge, a problem, the problem of evil. How could a good God allow anyone to do such horrific things? If God is all-knowing, then he or she or it is completely aware of what's going on, and if all-powerful, could easily stop it. Yet the thunderbolts don't come. Many atheists have taken the existence of so much evil as conclusive proof that there can't be a good God, and that there probably isn't a God at all. The problem of evil seems to be a genuine problem for anyone who wants to believe that there is. One response, the free will defense, is this. God could have created human beings that always did the right thing, never harmed anyone else, never went astray, but that would have made us automata, pre-programmed robots. It's far better to have free will with the genuine risk that some people will end up evil than to live in a world without choice. That's the claim. Victims of Caligula, Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, and the rest might disagree. And even if you accept the free will defense, it doesn't explain natural evil.
So we saw there an example of a theodicy, the free will defense. A theodicy is an attempt to defend the existence of God in the face of evil and suffering. I presented there the big problem. But of course, plenty of theists have said, look, we don't think this is a problem, or we think that this problem is solvable, it's explainable. We can maintain a belief in an all-loving and all-powerful God, even in the face of evil and suffering. And when a philosopher or a theologian tries to do that, tries to defend God in the face of evil and suffering, then we call that defense, that argument that they come up with, a theodicy. Theodicy is an attempt to defend God. So let's have a look at a few famous theodicies. One that we just looked at, that was just examined in that video, the free will defense. And Alvin Plantinga, there's a picture of him there, a famous theologian, Christian thinker, has put forward one of the perhaps most sophisticated free will defenses, although this argument has been made for thousands of years. So his argument here is that God wanted to create the best of all possible worlds. And Plantinga argues a world containing creatures that are free, that have free will, is better than a world creating no free creatures. God is able to create free creatures. To be free, we have to be capable of both moral good and moral evil. Otherwise, we wouldn't have free will, we wouldn't be free. So God can't create a creature, a human, people, that can only choose to do good things. If they can only choose to do good things, they don't have free will. That means, first of all, they can't be praised for those things. Those things aren't praiseworthy. If you do something good, but you had no other choice, then we can't say, oh, well done for doing that good thing. You didn't have any other choice. And his argument is, we can imagine a world in which there were humans that had no free will, and that world wouldn't be better than this world. It's better to have free creatures that do moral evil than non-free creatures where there's no moral evil, because free will is something to be so prized. Another defense was put forward by John Hick quite recently, about in the 1960s and 70s, although it goes back to ancient Greek philosopher called Irenaeus, who put forward his theodicy. And this theodicy is sometimes called the veil of soul making. So Hick argues that God created humans unfinished, imperfect, that all of us are on a journey to becoming perfect, for him to becoming Christ-like or becoming in God's image. Now, for us to become perfect, we have to have good virtues like being kind, helping other people, showing compassion. And to show compassion, evil is required, suffering is required. You can't show compassion for somebody, you can't show care for somebody if there's no such thing as evil or suffering. So he calls this process soul making. The process of suffering is a process of soul making, of becoming Christ-like, becoming godlike, becoming perfect. And he argues that all of us will become perfect with enough suffering. Another thing he argues is this idea of epistemic distance. And that argument is that if all we could do was, if we didn't have free will, we could only do good things, or if God intervened as soon as something bad was going to happen, so somebody pulls a knife out and they're about to stab you and they get struck by lightning, and then you're walking down the street and a car's about to plow into you and the car suddenly magically stops dead, we'd realize that God exists. We'd say, oh, whenever anything bad is about to happen, whenever any suffering is about to happen, something steps in and stops it. And so that would reveal God's existence. And Hicks says that would then eliminate free will, because then we wouldn't make free choices. We wouldn't do the right thing because it's the right thing. We'd just be doing it because we know for a fact that God is up there. And so he said, for us to have real free will, God needs to maintain that epistemic distance. And he does that by not intervening. It was put another way. There's this nice quote to put it this way: "In the valley of suffering, despair, and bitterness abroad, but there also character is made. The valley of suffering is the vale of soul making." So this idea that, look, yes, there's evil, but there's also a lot of good, and there needs to be evil for there to be good. This has convinced some people, this sort of like theodicy. Similarly, the idea that we need free will, this has convinced some people that that free will is better. There are arguments against these. So, for example, if we imagine heaven, heaven is a place where presumably there is no evil and suffering. Otherwise, it wouldn't be heaven. But heaven is also a place where people have free will, because otherwise it wouldn't be heaven. So if we can imagine heaven where people have complete free will and there's no evil and suffering, then Plantinga's wrong. He says we can't create a world where there's no free will and everything is good. Well, it seems like heaven is that world. So God could have created this world like it was like heaven, where everybody chooses the right thing, even though, and there's no suffering. Similarly, the veil of soul making, the idea that we all need to go on this, like, evil and suffering is required for virtues, and that although there is some evil that allows good to happen, that doesn't necessarily point to a good God. It could just as easily point to an evil God. And the philosopher Stephen Law makes this point. So we'll watch this video where he points out the problem with the veil of soul making defense.
Some suppose reality is divided by a veil. On one side of the veil is the natural, observable world. Beyond the veil lies another realm of spirits, angels, demons, and of course, gods. These beings are supposed to inhabit an unobservable, supernatural domain that is off limits to science. How do we know these spirits, angels, demons, and gods are there? Some suppose special people, such as psychics and gurus, can glimpse through the veil and tell us about what lies beyond. For example, spiritualists claim they can communicate with those who have passed over to the other side. Others claim to encounter angels and even gods while praying or meditating. But how confident can we be that these mysterious beings are really there? Many atheists argue the world contains too much suffering for it to be the creation of a good God. There are wars, diseases, and natural disasters. Horrific human and animal suffering is built into the very fabric of the world we're forced to inhabit. Isn't this good evidence that even if there is a creator, he is not all-powerful and all-good? Of course, the faithful try to explain the suffering. Some talk about free will. They say God could have made us puppet beings that always behaved well. But if we're God's puppets, we're not responsible for what we do. God cut our strings so that we can freely choose to do good. But then some of us choose to do evil and cause suffering. That's the price God pays for our free will. So have we shown it's reasonable to believe in God after all? I don't think so. Suppose that, after a bump on the head, I come to believe the universe was created not by a good God, but by an evil God. I believe there's a single, all-powerful creator whose malice knows no bounds and whose wickedness is beyond our comprehension. Who believes in a God like that? Almost no one. Why not? Because the world would look much more like a torture chamber if it were created by such a powerful and wicked being. There's too much love and laughter, and too many people being kind and helping each other for this to be the creation of an evil God. Yet notice I can explain why my evil God allows good, in the same way religious folk explain why their good God allows evil. I can say, my evil God could have made us puppet beings that always did bad things, but if we're his puppets, we're not responsible for what we do. That's why evil God cut our strings and set us free, to allow us to freely choose to do evil. Unfortunately for evil God, some of us then choose to do good deeds. That's the price evil God pays to allow moral evil. Have I shown that belief in an evil God isn't absurd? No, of course not. Sure, I can cook up such ingenious explanations to defend both belief in a good God and belief in an evil God. But still, we can be pretty sure there's no evil God, can't we? So why can't we be pretty sure there's no good God either? We may not know why the universe exists, but surely we are justified in supposing it is not the creation of either of these two gods.
So Stephen Law pointing out there through his evil God hypothesis that the theodicies, the especially free will, the theodicies designed to defend God in the existence of evil and suffering, they could equally be applied to not an omnibenevolent God but an evil God, and they work just the same way. And yet nobody would believe in an evil God. They would say, no, that's ridiculous. But if it's ridiculous for an evil God, then it should be equally ridiculous for a good God. And so what Stephen Law is trying to do is not convince you that an evil God exists, but show you that if the argument doesn't stand for evil God, then it doesn't stand for good God either. And so we have the free will defense doesn't work in terms of defending God's existence. It's not a good argument. So, where has that left us? Well, let's consider this question. The existence of moral evil and suffering makes belief in an all-powerful, loving God irrational. You are irrational to believe it. It's an illogical thing to believe. There's plenty of evidence against that belief. It doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't believe in an all-powerful, loving God, given the existence of moral evil and suffering. I'd like you to evaluate that statement. So that's going to involve you setting out exactly what moral evil, natural evil, and suffering, the problem they present, what the problem of evil is. It's going to involve you exploring the concept of God, what we mean by God. And you'll have to explore some of the theodicies designed to defend God. You'll have to explore whether or not you think they work. And that's what the evaluation part is. Do you think that they are convincing? Are the theodicies convincing? Are the arguments against the theodicies, like the evil God hypothesis, are they convincing? Do they convince you? Do they make sense? Are they logical? And lastly, just focusing on this word here, irrational. That's what the question is saying. It's irrational. Is it irrational? What does it mean for something to be irrational? And is this an irrational thing to believe? That's what I'd like you to do today. Write about a page on that, about 500 words. The document is on the assignment. This PowerPoint is also there, and I put another video there on the problem of evil. Please feel free to do your own research as well to read widely. Remember, getting ready for A-level requires independent study and research. You need to read more widely than just the textbook and the set texts. And so this is a good opportunity to start practicing doing that. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you tomorrow for our theology lesson and look forward to reading your work.